Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I have a real pleasure to introduce some people from Israel and Budapest. Joe George is from Israel, and Felina Hart is from Budapest. So I'm going to ask them to very briefly explain to you what they do and how they use they'll be talking to you about the solution-focused approach that they use with their students. So thank you, Joe and Felina, for talking to us late in the afternoon where you are.
So Joe likes to blame me for him getting involved in Solution Focused, but I think I was just there to help push him a little bit. And since then, we've been connected together. And we have actually spoken at a couple different conferences together. And we actually spend quite a bit of time working together and sharing ideas. And so that's one of the focus today is we wanted to just share some of the ideas that we've collected from other places and then how we've actually put that into use within our school systems, especially within the international circuit.
And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the international circuit, every non-English speaking country outside the US, every major city has anywhere between 1 and 10 international schools. If you ever want to know more about that circuit, you could also contact either one of us and we'd be happy to give you some more information if you're curious. The Solution Focused Foundation, as you were just listening to Elliot when he was talking about we are hope builders, that is the number one principle everyone needs to stick with. Learn it, live it, love it, never ever destroy it. And with that philosophy, we build off of people's memories and imaginations to help them create that preferred future they deserve. And therefore, we only explore past, present, and future successes rather than rolling around in the failures using the principles and strategies on the screen that most of you are probably pretty savvy with. With that, just in case you want a quick refresher, we thought we'd toss this in. Now, there are many ways to do solution-focused therapy, which I was shocked by when I first got trained because I really thought there was only one approach. And then I realized that you can have many different variations as long as you follow these principles. And one standard approach that a lot of people do follow with this, like Elliot, for example, they start off with a best hope and get kind of a clarifier to secure a contract. And then after they have that, moving forward to dig through strengths and exceptions to make portable, to then segue using the miracle or tomorrow question to build the question that creates that preferred future. And most practitioners roll around in this part for 70, 80%. Linda, however, flips that completely. And if you get to know her more, you can dig into that, or you can watch my vlog where I analyze her variation. So she actually approved of it. Maybe you'll like it. And then they conclude with general takeaways, strengths, observations, whatnot. These two templates, if you like the general template and the resources that will be tied to this, you can get these or others. This one, I also have prompts on the side. If you're really new to it, you need some reminders that can carry you through.
So at this point, where do we use solution-focused practice? I've used it when I first started digging into it. It started because when I went into the international circuit, and even when I was working in the schools in Texas, I had a lot of teachers that would drop students off at my door and be like, you need to take care of them. They're not doing this. They're not doing that. And I just thought there has to be a better way. And then when I would sit Asian plan meetings and different things, a lot of the talk was around everything that the student wasn't doing. And I always would say, yes, but I've seen them do this, and I've seen them do this, and I've seen them able to function within the environment. And so I thought there had to be a better way. So I started looking into where I could get some training, and that's where I went to Brief in London. And within there, I just started slowly at my school putting it into different areas. So the individual counseling and the group counseling. But then when I would have meetings with parents, I used it. I often had to have mediations between parents or students or coworkers. And so I started using the solution-focused talk in those meetings. With the student support meetings, they started off as concern meetings and then moved to support meetings because the solution-focused conversation was used. Leader conversations. So when speaking with my administrator, using that, parent and staff presentations, coaching and mentorship through our advisory program. So I work with especially a lot of our teachers on how they could add this into their advisory program and how they can use it when they're coaching students or mentoring them. And then also just setting up a full counseling program where all the forms and everything, which we're going to talk about, are solution focused based.
And along those lines, one thing that we all have to take into account is the fact that our administrators will really have some control over how much we can really dig around and roll around. So for me, I had to start with just within my counseling office and what I was doing. And then I was able to extrapolate outward more. And like Felina was saying, I do all these things too in these areas. One thing we want you to do, we're going to challenge you a couple times right now. If you have a piece of a piece of paper and a pen, if you could document right now, just jot down, where do you think solution focused talk could be implemented in your school right now? And we're going to pause for a second and see, we're going to come back to this periodically.
So then when I was first started with this, I was working with 4-year-olds all the way up to grade 8. And so it's a very different approach you have to take with different students at different age levels. And in the elementary, what I realized was making it as interactive and physical as possible really helped them to take on those ideas. You can't sit with a first grader and really just kind of talk about this. You have to make it interactive. So I created a Velcro scale where they could actually have these little characters, and you'll see on the next slide that they could actually physically take off and move along the scale. And that was all along my door. And as my office changed, the scale would get bigger and be moved around. I've also used sensory paths. So a lot of schools nowadays will have the sensory path. So I would actually take the student out onto that sensory path. And in order to get to the end of the sensory path, we had to kind of go through these questions and comments and talk about things using role plays, having them draw out their hopes, having them draw out what things would look like. And so just making it really interactive and using it in a way that related to where they were in their development.
Similarly, I know a lot of people like to use skills cards or strengths cards, and it's the same kind of thing. And Chris Iveson made a comment that you can do this as easily with 4-year-olds as you can with 40-year-olds. And you just have to change how you word it. You don't have to change the principles you use. One thing, if you do get any school leaders, a good number of the teachers are probably familiar with backwards design, understanding by design, the UBD approach. And another way you can also use this is through looking at the structure where you can identify the best hope, look at the difference that would make, but then rather than starting with what's working now, start with that preferred future, what it looks like after the challenge has been overcome, dig around in that, and then you go back to what you are now. And then you could even do like a first semester, second semester, walking through, putting it onto the scale and thinking about how are you going to know you're there? What will the signs be? What will the first small signs be? And if you have an administrator who's totally into it, you can also bring this out to staff meetings. We did a whole student concerns revision to a student success plan that we'll get to later. But when we started with it, the principal let me have a staff meeting and we looked at what is working. And we documented a whole bunch of things together. And we looked at what it will look like in the end. And then we looked at what was working now. And then we looked at the next steps. And most of the meeting was actually spent on the preferred future and then the tomorrow. So rather than doing it as using the tomorrow question as a springboard to build the preferred future, we did it as an understanding by design, writing the assessment, stating where we are now, and then doing the path. And then the path was the powerful part that helped us really do the revision. And then we had the key takeaways.
And I've used this in my role even as safeguarding lead. So not only am I the middle school counselor, but I'm also the safeguarding lead for the whole school. So I'm in charge of making sure all our policies and procedures for protecting kids in our community are in place. And so when I took it over last year, I actually did a solution-focused conversation with my director where we talked about what is it that we're hoping for? What is it that we want? What should it look like? And then developed our action plan based on that and looked at where we were and then what were the steps we were going to take to move forward.
And with the classroom, if you are at all familiar with the guys over at Brief, Harvey has done a whole bunch of books. I love this book. We're going to mention it several different times. It's Solution Focused Practice in Schools. We have the link in here. And the reason why it's so good is because he gives tons of applicable examples as to how you can use it in different situations in the school, for like quick hallway passes, like when someone's walking by you, setting up classrooms, norming, like what we're talking about here, in 3-minute conversations, 5-minute conversations, etc. But for norming, it's normal for a lot of teachers and counselors or administrators when they start meetings, the first meeting, they do the norming and they do like the rules that you have to follow. We request that you consider trying to do a solution-focused approach and flip it and say, how will we know this is going to be a successful group? What signs will we see? And then have everybody talk about taking the solutions and looking at the strengths and successes and what we can do to build forward. And then you can create that whole list. And then what else, all the stuff you guys know how to do.
And I'm a huge proponent of the scales. I love scales. So I put them in wherever I can. And so actually with my advisory teachers and that, I actually took the wellness wheel that a lot of times you'll see, and I just created a blank one where students could put certain parts of those rules on there. And then from there, they could take time throughout the year rating themselves on where they're at and what they're doing well. And then we ask them those questions. So what are you doing that puts you there? How do you, if you move up 1 point, what is that going to look like? And so they're constantly reviewing all those things as they go through their advisory program with that wellness wheel.
So for classroom reflections, what can you do with that, Felina?
Yeah, so with reflections, especially in our school, a lot of the grading system that's done, it's very different than the grading system that's in the US. In our school, it's a 1 through 7, and in there, students actually have to do self-reflections that actually are part of their reports that go out. And so with that, I try to encourage my teachers to make those reflections as solution focused as possible. So what are the things that, they were pleased with their learning? One thing that they're doing differently in their learning that they felt good about, something that they feel confident about. Okay, what are things that maybe they found difficult? And then what did they do? How did they push through that? How did they do that? And so just trying to make those reflections. And even on the projects that they work on, everything, they can make those reflections very solution focused based, which then changes the dynamic. And I've noticed that it really helps with the students to buy into their education and buy into and make it, internalize it, that it's something that they're doing and it's not the teacher's responsibility.
One thing that it's always a good reminder for people who are novices or pros alike is to think about how they can apply this to each individual lesson, not just the norming at the beginning. If you're somebody, if you feel like the group is just going bonkers, and you can pause and say, maybe you'll probably have your agenda up on the board, and you could pause and say, well, what has worked well so far this hour? And then you can like literally put on the emergency brake and do a reflection during the lesson. And it really focuses, and they'll be like, huh? And say, well, what's worked well so far? And, well, nothing. Okay. Well, what will be the signs that, again, pointing to the agenda, what will be the signs that the lesson goes well? Like, what are we going to see by the end? And then have them list it. You can do this emergency break and really only take about 1 or 2 minutes out of the whole lesson. And it helps do a whole reboot and refocus without embarrassing anybody. And then at the end of the lesson, you just remember to leave 2 minutes before the end and say, okay, what were the big takeaways? And then they stop and they're focusing on the successes and the main points. And it's just a way of doing somewhat fairly traditional teaching, but applying solution-focused strategies.
And another area is parent and staff meetings. One I've noticed, especially working with parents from different countries, a lot can be distrusting of what they call the Western way. And so when I've changed the conversation to make it more solution focused, it's actually changed the dynamic within that relationship with that parent. An example, I had a student who had come to me their 8th grade year, and their brother had already been in our school for a few years, and the parents were finally able to get the older brother in. And the parents were being asked for the younger brother to get testing. Well, when the 8th grader came in, there was a lot of difficulties. The system at our school is very different from the Ukrainian system. and the boy was very used to being shamed. And so when I actually had the parent meeting with the teachers, I changed the dynamic, and I asked the teachers, I said, I want to know at least two things that the student's doing well, and what's the one main concern that you have. So we started off there, and then we started talking about, well, what will the teacher be doing when we see the difference? What will the student be doing? What will the parent be doing? And when we had that conversation, it completely changed the dynamics with the parents. And that next day, that parent came in and said, this is the first time we've actually heard great things about our kids. This is the first time that we've went to a school and the teachers talked about what our students were doing well. They said, we trust you completely. Whatever we need to do, we're on board. And then from that point forward, we were able to have a different relationship with that parent and really help the students to be successful. But also using it with staff meetings. Last year with COVID, around Christmas time, our staff was having a really hard time with the hybrid learning and all the restrictions and the different things that were going on and not being able to see their family. And so we actually did a whole meeting that was dedicated just to processing COVID through solution-focused conversation. And that's linked in there. So when you get the presentation, you can look at some of the things that came out of it. But after that meeting, the teacher said that they finally felt like they had a voice, that they could really kind of just talk about what was going on, but also see the positives that were happening. And it completely helped them get through the rest of the year. And so that conversation that we did in the middle school, I shared it with my counselors in the elementary and high school, and they did it in their divisions as well. And it completely had a different feel. And the teachers were able to process and move forward.
If you're in this presentation right now, we're obviously preaching to the choir, but with this, one thing that I've had people tell me that they like about solution-focused thinking and solution-focused talk in general is that it works with all cultures. If you look at Adam Furr's research and different people like Dr. Kim, there are people that have looked at different cultures around the planet. And the reason why it's so good with so many different people, it's kind of like the old Gestalt theory that you help them create meaning for themselves by using their strengths to get to their preferred future. It's not us counselors that are listening and doling out the advice. We're just guiding their ideas by asking questions that use their imaginations and their memories.
And Joe and I, we work with families I know at my school, we have families from 60 different countries. So to be able to have an approach where we can use despite cultural differences, it's really helpful.
This right here is a template that is actually linked to this presentation. So when you look at the presentation later, if you like the stuff that's right here, this is a generic template that you can steal. And when I said we were able to repackage the student concerns meetings to student success meetings, this is a Google site that teachers have to complete things before we actually have the meeting. And for the student referral form, what they see initially is like you'll have your students loaded for each grade. I am currently a middle school counselor, as Felina is. And so I based this on the template we actually use. I just took off the names. And you would pick the student. Then they have to start off with 1 to 3 strengths. Hit next. Then they look at 1 or 2 areas of need. And then prompting them to describe what the success will look like for that kid. Because they can't write the generic success for all kids. You're asking them to think about this kid and write what success will look like for this kid. And then you have the same thing for social issues, for social behavioral issues. But then the next page is the kid EAL, learning support, and when did you contact parents? And then you can turn it in. And then when you meet, then the counselor, you as a counselor will get all this information. And then when you meet, you the counselor, you're going to go through all this before the spreadsheet, before the people come in for the meeting. And then you just jot down the participants, any general information. You again put the kid or kids that are being discussed. And then this comes fairly similar to mirroring Linda's approach with starting out with the best hope, then looking at what does it look like when it's working, And you can actually even paste in a lot of that information from the stuff the teachers have given you. So you could fill this out in advance before the people walk in. You have the things they've already shared about what the 10 will look like. And then you can just say, what is missing? What else is needed? What else? So it'll speed up the meeting by the fact that you've pasted in some of the stuff. And then you can really roll around in what's working now. And then what will it look like when the student moves up one number? And so doing this, teachers start getting familiar with the language, and doing it, it forces them to think about successes and that preferred future around the guiding principles of the best hope. And some teachers will begrudgingly keep bringing up negative things, but then you could say, if nothing else, well, we need to fill out this form. So even though I created the form, so yes, I cheated. So, but like you can get the naysayers in because it's time sensitive, and you have the form presented on the screen, and you're doing it together.
Yeah, and so when I start with this in Ukraine, when I had a lot of teachers that would come and just drop the students at my door mid-class and say, you need to do something about them. What I try to work with teachers on is that the moment that they do that, they're damaging that relationship that they have with that student, and that student's starting to feel like the teacher doesn't like them or doesn't have any care for them. And so I actually went through and started designing what a counseling program would look like using Solutionfocused. So I have all the links in there, and it's based off of not only my training and brief, but also some of Russell Sabella's work. And so so I explained what a counseling program is, what it does, what are the concerns, what are things that they could do in the classroom first. And then when it gets to the point where the student may need to see me, then what are the referrals or the checklist and things that they need to do. So everything's in there and documented, but the referrals are actually solution focused. So what are the things that are doing well? If you had to rate the student at this point, where would you rate them? What it would look like if they moved up. And then after they've met with me for 6 weeks, then we do a check-in with the teachers as well, and we get a feedback form. And then anytime a parent comes to me, I would actually sit there and have that solution-focused conversation with the parent and try to talk about what the student's actually doing well and where we can build on their strengths.
And as Felina mentioned before, sometimes the habits the parents have are one of the reasons that the problems are there in the first place. So getting them to break out of their habit is a good way to actually get progress forward. And Solutionfocused offers a lot of that, especially if you're using any of these to structure the feedback and the guidelines, because you get them talking about the positive stuff that they might have forgotten. They might, and especially in middle school years, sometimes those kids get ornery. They talk to the parents less than ever, but they need them more than ever. And like high schoolers, they look like adults. They think they're adults and they can't pull it off. Elementary school kids know they're kids. Middle schoolers don't know what they are, and they're open to trying new things. But so sometimes they're little kids, sometimes they're adults. And it's this just helps them focus on the positives to move forward.
And then we also talked earlier about using it with mediations and conversations. And so in here linked a coaching card, which actually came from the work in Berlin, Brandenburg, where they've actually trained their whole staff on Solutionfocused, and their whole advisory program and everything is set up through Solutionfocused. And so they do these mentorships with these students based on solution-focused conversations, but also just with the mediations, especially when you're mediating with staffs, because I'll have some staff that will come to me and say, look, I'm really having a difficult time with this person, and they're looking for advice. And so I would go through Solutionfocused with them and then would kind of guide them on how they could have those conversations.
I was lucky enough to have a conversation with Ben Furman, who's kind of a Solutionfocused icon in Europe. He was telling me one of the biggest slogan that he would come up for people, like the biggest selling point on becoming a Solutionfocused therapist, is the fact that we have less burnout. We're better because we aren't rolling around in the muck. We're not like, one of the reasons why I gravitated towards this when Felina reintroduced me to it is because I was in a rut, and after rolling around in people's problems problems all day, every day for 8 years of counseling. And that's after my 10 years of teaching at that point. I was near done. And this was so invigorating because it was so hopeful. And not only is it hopeful for the client, it's hopeful for us because we stop rolling around in the muck and we start helping the people get to that place with their shoes dry rather than stopping at every puddle to stomp around in it. And it's something that was invigorating and powerful for me.
And it's about empowering others as well. So I'll have teachers come to me and say, hey, I have to have this conversation with the student, any words of advice. And so I sit there and I share with them the ideas of solution focus. And I actually give them like a little cheat sheet, a little script that they can go off of. And teachers have said it's changed the dynamics with their students. They feel like they're really then being able to hear what their students trying to say and being able to build that relationship. So empowering as many people as you can with the skills changes the dynamic.
Obviously, it changes the dynamic on the negative side, but especially in American culture, our default answer to anything is good job. And it cuts conversation. Like Alfie Cohen had this article years ago, 5 Reasons to Stop Saying Good Job. I think it was like from 2003 or something it's linked here. But solution focus is the same thing. Rather than saying good job, which you need to cut from your overall lexicon, by the way, is to say, wow, that looked tough. How'd you manage to do it? And I remember the first time I was really rolling around in this, and there was this girl who wouldn't speak. She was like near mute, and she had the lead to the play. And I went and saw her at the play, and she played this wicked witch. She stole the show. She was this hackling, cackling. And then after the show, I saw her and said, that looks so tough. How did you do it? And we had a conversation, and she was like, oh, you have no idea. But it was the best conversation we had ever at that point. All because I did not say good job. And if you guide yourself with these kind of strategy questions and follow-ups and alternatives, and then just remember what else? And Felina, do you want to add anything about this one?
No, I mean, it's about changing the dynamic of that conversation. Even when I have students that, have to come to my office to work and stuff because they're not working within class. When they I just sit there very calm and patient and talk with them. And then when they finally do something, I'm like, you got that done. What allowed you to get that done? What was it for there? It seemed like a struggle. How did you work past that struggle? And then it completely changes their mindset with the work that they have to do and what they're being asked to do with the teachers. And then we see an improvement in them actually focusing and doing what they need to do in class.
With that, one of the best things that I can highly recommend for any of us to do, I'm not necessarily here to hawk Elliott Connie's stuff, but he's the only person I've encountered that actually has live video sessions that you can purchase. And so if you do any of his packages, I would say it's money well spent, and you might be able to get your school to actually pay for it as well if you have a professional development fund. And even if you don't, it's very powerful watching other people do it. And like Steve DeShazer and Insoo Kim Berg, with the two of them, they literally built it by watching each other. And since we don't have the luxury of watching ourselves or each other very often, I do recommend considering going to Elliott's site and getting one of his paid packages for the videos. I started watching them after I was trained, and for me, it was really powerful and meaningful. And like we said, for this book right here, this is an example. It's only on page 6. And it's a 5-minute conversation. The book is chocked full of 3-minute conversations, 5-minute conversations, classroom reflections. It's very powerful to think about all the different places and ways we can put this into our daily practice.
I would say, nothing we've shared here today probably is anything, new or unique. I mean, it's just taking the concepts that we have and taking the information from different places and then adapting it and making it your own. because I think that's one of the things I love most about the solution focus is you can adapt it to your style and you can make it your own and you can use it in different areas. But I would say also, if you're using this in a school, the best way is to start slow and slowly just start adding the conversation in anytime you're meeting with somebody or talking with somebody. And that's what I've done in both the schools that I've been using this with, is I just slowly use the conversation and I slowly start working it in. And we were in a meeting the other day, and a student success meeting the other day, we were talking about this particular student and some of the things that were going on. And it was funny, my administrator goes, well, it sounds like maybe they would benefit from a solution-focused conversation. And I was just like, yes, because all that slow talk and slow movement, eventually people start hearing it and then they start taking it, because it is a mind shift for a lot of people, especially in education. It can be a mind shift. So when you can slowly just add it in, you help with that mind shift and you help the community adapt it.
With all that said, you can't start until you start. So if you're a novice who hasn't been playing around in this much, start. And it's always going to be scary. And if you need to use one of the templates, the reason why I came up with the templates is because I kept skipping steps and I would get so excited. And then when you get anxious, you fall back on what you know. And I would find myself reverting back to a problem-focused approach. And so I put together the templates and to guide me. And it's funny because I know like it's common with the US that you never take notes during session. And I was always behind on my student notes. And when I was getting trained, Evan George at Brief, we were watching one of his sessions and he was taking notes during session. And I said, are you supposed to do that? And he said, wait, what? I said, well, I was in the US, they always tell us not to take notes during session. And he looked at me and said, when am I supposed to take them? I said, after? And he said, that doesn't sound like a very good use of my time. And I was like, well, if I'm going to take notes, could I make a cheat sheet? He said, sure, why not? So I created the first template. And now I usually use the second one a little bit more. And I also have a little whiteboard. And the thing about all this is it's not a distraction. Frequently, it's calming and a relief, because they don't have to stare at you the whole time. And you can have that. Most of the time, a lot of the kids don't even notice you're taking notes, because I usually use it on my iPad and I have the PDFs and I just write right on there. But sometimes I have this little whiteboard and I'll pivot it and show it to them. And I'm just like, okay, well, we said this and this and you have these. So what else will we have? And then it's calming and it takes pressure off, because they can look at something other than you. And then even better yet, you can snap a picture and email it to them at the end, or if you're doing the PDF, you can export it directly to them, and they have takeaways. And then you just finish with, look for signs it's working, and we'll meet in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, however long the plan is.
And I even had students help with the note taking. So I'll have paper there and I have them writing stuff down as I'm writing stuff as well, or drawing pictures that relate to what we're talking about. And it helps with that conversation.
If you are running groups, you can do exactly what Felina just said and use one of those templates, and each one can have their own one. And then that way they're creating their own workbook of sorts, their takeaways that could be totally individualized. And even if they only draw pictures or whatever, it also can be calming and relaxing to not stare at each of the kids while still giving feedback and talking about the positive things and successes they have.
Thank you, Joe and Felina, so much. I mean, I've gotten comments in the chat already, and if you all would please kindly put some questions in the chat, and I'm going to talk with them for a second as you put those questions in. Please feel free to ask whatever you like. But I'm hearing things like what great experiences that the people are loving hearing your experiences. And they're also picking up on your passion for solution-focused therapy. I mean, it's so obvious. I mean, isn't it? Whenever it starts working with students and parents and teachers, it gets us excited and we want to do more of it. Does that happen for you all like that?
It happens for me. Like I notice, I mean, like Joe said, it's easy in education to get into a rut, especially when everybody's coming to you with problems. And so I know when I've used this, it's changed my relationship with my school community as a whole, and especially with the students. But also when I started using it, I was so passionate about it that I started sharing it. And that's how Joe and I connected, because we would have this CISA counselors conference. And I said, okay, I want to share about this. And I actually had Denise Yusuf and Evan George come to one of the conferences. And I'm like, I need you all to come. We'll get you paid for you to come. And I want you to talk to them about this. And every time I do one of those talks, or I talk to other counselors about it and I give them the information I have and I share, it helps me to feel good about what's happening. But then I also get feedback from them about how it's taken a weight off of them. They started really questioning whether or not they want to stay in education, whether or not they still want to be a school counselor. And then when they start using this, they feel like it's just changes that dynamic, and they're more willing to then sit there and feel good about where they're at. And I think it's going to help. It helps then to keep good counselors in schools.
Yeah, I love how you all have done this. You've got a long checklist, and instead of talking about what's wrong, what skills shall they use, which assumes they've got skills. What will they be doing soon when they're improving? I mean, from the very beginning, even in the referral process, you're setting the stage for solution talk. So this is just lovely. We're getting so many compliments for you all in the chat of the templates you've produced. So
like last year, I had a student who had a lot of difficulty in getting work completed in class. And the teachers were really frustrated because he would sit there and it would take him an hour to do one math problem. And he would just get frustrated with himself, and he would get very upset with himself. And so then he would come to me at lunch and we'd sit there and go through this. And at one point he turned to me, he goes, "Aren't you going to get tired of seeing me? Aren't you going to get tired of sitting here and talking to me about all the good stuff?" And I said, "No. That's not who I am. I'm not going to get tired of you. I'm always going to be here. I'm always going to have you come into my office. I'm always going to be talking to you." And we've seen a huge growth in that student because he was so used to people just giving up on him. And he was using what he was doing as a way to get people to leave him alone. And when he realized that myself and the teachers weren't going to give up on him, and we were going to talk about what he was doing well and how we want more of that, it completely changed.
And here's the thing too, and I'm so glad that you do this. I mean, because here's the thing, kids know what they're doing wrong. They don't need to hear from us. Instead, they need the new mindset that you and Joe are using and Elliot was talking about looking beyond that possibly what else is there about a student other than the presenting issue? And I think that's what you all do so well in this referral process.
I know the school, when I came here to Budapest, I mean, there's a lot of staff members who have been here 10 years, 15 years. And here I am, this new person. And, and everything I kept hearing was, especially from certain people, was that they didn't have a lot of success with counselors in the past. And so they were just looking at me as another person that was filling a hole that wasn't going to do anything. And so once I start really building that trust and showing them that, no, I'm here for everybody, I'm here for the community, I'm here to work together, it changes that dynamic. And so it is a long process, and it's something that you have to do slowly. I realized you can't come in and just say, "Here's all my ideas and this is what we're going to do." Instead, you got to kind of slowly start putting it in there, because if you come in as this expert, they're going to shut down right away. But instead, if you just slowly start adding the talking and slowly start doing things, then they see it as they're involved in the process.
Absolutely. It's the same thing as working with clients. You want to get their input so that you let them direct you. One of the questions is, Felina and George, is what was the first thing that you did to introduce staff to a solution-focused approach? I think you just said it so well for a second, Felina, when you said you go very slowly, and you certainly don't go in saying, "Okay, you've done anything wrong, we're going to start all over again." How did you all do that? What was the first thing you did?
The first thing I did when I went after my first training, they would have in the secondary school, they would have these meetings where they would talk about at-risk students. And I didn't like that term, at-risk. What are they at risk for? After I started doing the training, first meeting I went into, I told my principal, I said, "I'm going to pipe up and ask some questions in this." And she just kind of looked at me, I said, just go with me, please. I said, "You sent me to this training, just go with me." And so when the first teacher piped up, and then I just said, "Okay, so can you tell me one thing that they do well, one success that they've had?" Mm-hmm. And everybody just kind of looked at me. And I said, no, I really want to know, because if we can find at least one success they've had, we can find out how they've had that success. Maybe we can apply that to the other classrooms. And so that was my first step into it, was going into these meetings that were gripe sessions and just trying to change the dynamic of that meeting.
Yeah.
And it took a few times going in and doing that. And it's hard because you have everybody looking at you and wondering why you're doing this, but you have to just stay firm and you have to just keep with it.
Yeah.
And eventually others get on board.
And with that, one thing I highly recommend is you get farther with sugar than vinegar. So build the relationship with the biggest naysayer. Mm-hmm. So do the sneak. Felina and I joke around about taking the sneak attack and just building the relationship with the person. And sometimes you can even go see the person before, if you know it's one or two specific people, you can go see them before the meeting and say, you know what, I need your help on something and I want to try it. And I want to see if you could help me along with it. And then they feel like they're being sneaky and that they're in control. You walk them through it for just a couple minutes before the meeting. And then all the other times you see them, just go ask them how their kids are. Ask them, well, what are some things that are going well in their life, and build that relationship. And generally, if you build the relationship outside of the meeting, the biggest thorns in your side will be the easiest to convert.
You guys have summarized this all so nice, so nice. I wish I could have you on all day long. But thank you so much for joining us today from Budapest and Israel. Your kids are lucky, that's for sure. Don't you all agree? Everybody who's listening to them really, really are. Thank you so much.